Do you think you could do this? So the king asks you to be the leader of a town because the previous one passed away and the king's rather fond of you. You get a personal escort from the king's men so you arrive safely, but along the way you decide that you need to take a break, so you and the king's men stop and they let their horses go in a farmer's field. But that's one of the people that will be part of your village. And immediately you tell them to go get their horses back. But they just laugh. So you just outright tell them nobody's allowed to disregard his people, not even the king himself, and go round up those horses. That could get somebody killed depending on the king's mood, really. But Saint Nicetius didn't care. He did what was right for his people. Could you do the same in his shoes? Howdy y'all, and welcome back to another episode of the Sanctified Podcast, the show where we explore the stories of various saints throughout history and learn about what they did and how we came to recognize them as saints today. Today, we're going to explore the life of Saint Nicetius of Trier, a fearless leader for his people. We unfortunately don't know too many details about his early life, but we do know that Nicetius was born in the late 5th century, maybe the early 6th century. Some sources suggest that, but it's more likely the late 5th century. But again, the date isn't exactly known. He came from an average family, no royalty or high political positions, just plain old ordinary people. And he did show particular piety at an early age. He even entered into a monastery as soon as he could. He was an exceptionally good student, and he was so devout, always in prayer, always teaching others, and always helping however he could. It didn't take long for him to be appointed as abbot of his monastery. While he was abbot, King Theodoric I heard rumors of an inspirational and exceptionally devout abbot, and he just had to meet this guy. When they met, Nicetius actually opposed the king and said as much about how the king ruled. But for some reason, this didn't change King Theodoric's opinion on Nicetius. He still loved him. Fast forward a year or so, and then the bishop of Trier, Germany, Aprunculus, passed away, and so the people needed a new bishop. They wanted St. Gall to be their bishop. I mean, who wouldn't want a bishop with a pet bear? But Theodoric shot that idea down. Back to the drawing board, the people voted for St. Nicetius next. And you already know Theodoric loved Nicetius, so he gave his approval right away. In 527, Nicetius was appointed the Bishop of Trier, and he set out to his new assignment. An escort was sent by Theodoric to make sure Nicetius made it safely to his new charge, and he took his new duties very seriously. He looked out for his people even before he made it all the way to Trier proper. One of the escorts let his horse roam freely in a wheat field to eat whatever it wanted and trampling whatever it walked over while searching for the best wheat to eat. And Nicetius wasn't going to let that stand. He told them they better stop or else they wouldn't be allowed in Trier again. But they just laughed at him. He then said, "The king has drawn me, a poor abbot, from my quiet cloister to set me over this people, and by God's grace I will do my duty by them and protect them from wrong and robbery." With that, Nicetius went out and brought the horses out of the field himself. And so he established his care for his community clearly and strongly before he even got there. Upon arrival in Trier, Nicetius identified what needed to be done to improve the people's lives and what he could do to improve them. People looked up to him as a bishop, but remember, he was just a bishop. He wasn't their official ruler. Right away, he realized the cathedral in Trier was in terrible condition and needed a lot of work to be a cathedral to be proud of. He worked with the people of Trier, and they repaired it and rebuilt portions of the cathedral. Nicetius also built a castle with a chapel on the Moselle River, and these were spectacular structures in their day. People loved them. But fixing buildings up wasn't the only thing he did as bishop. He was very zealous in his duties as a spiritual guide for the people. He preached every day and would actively oppose the wrongdoings in not only the ordinary person who looked up to him, but also the upper classes, including the king. And not just King Theodoric, but also King Clotaire I. He wasn't afraid to say what needed to be said. Clotaire wasn't as fond of Nicetius as Theodoric was, and so he actually exiled the bishop. But it would turn out that Clotaire would die the next year, and his son, Sigebert, reversed the exiling of Nicetius and allowed him to come back. For the next several years, Nicetius attended multiple meetings with holy leaders as well as political leaders. And, he spoke his mind and said what he thought was best. Also, if you recall from an early episode about Peter Chrysologus, something called monophysitism was a fairly prominent issue that was battling Christianity and Catholicism around this time. And if you didn't see that episode, monophysitism argues that Jesus lost all his human nature and is solely a divine being. The problem is that diminishes what he did while he was human, and so it causes quite a stir in the church. It was a really divisive subject in its time. And though it may not have been in its heyday, monophysitism was still around for Nicetius. And he even wrote a letter to Emperor Justinian of Constantinople about how wrong it was and how the emperor should reconsider it. In fact, Nicetius wrote many letters to people, be they bishops or kings or common people, and that actually really helped solidify his story and stance on faith in history and just identify him as a true person. There's too many saints where it's like, there's these references, but there's nothing from them. Nicetius has a lot of his own writings that we still have today. And even better than that, it also helps that some of his students helped Gregory of Tours assemble a short biography about him. And speaking of students, I should mention here that he founded a school for teaching clergymen. Of his students, Aridius, who is abbot of Limoges, was the most helpful for Gregory of Tours in assembling Nicetius' story. And these records tell us about some of Nicetius' miracles. In 543, a plague was spreading rapidly across the lands around Trier, but miraculously, Trier itself was untouched. There was also a story of how Nicetius had a vision from angels in which they revealed to him the fates of the current and future kings of the Franks. He also lists in less detail how prisoners were freed, perjurers were punished, the blind were granted vision, and how the possessed were exorcised, all because of Saint Nicetius. It is rather nice that we have these records from Gregory of Tours because, again, we've had too many saints where it's just, quote, like a number of miracles, and that's all the details. We have a lot more details about Nicetius. So, again, that's so nice. And you might be able to surmise this from knowing the stories of other saints. Saint Nicetius led an ascetic life, regularly fasting and avoiding the pleasures and luxuries that others sought. He was known to even sneak out of meals that other priests were enjoying so that he could just go pray in the church all by himself. And I gotta admit, I would have a pretty hard time with that. I enjoy meals way too much to just go leave and pray instead. If you're interested, you can find some of his letters online, and they're pretty interesting because many of them are addressed to royalty, and he's basically lecturing some of them on how to be better leaders, which isn't really what you'd expect to see in a letter to a king or queen. You'd think that a letter from a bishop would be like, oh, you're doing a great job, don't forget to give some money to the church. No, Nicetius operated on his own system. And that's just how Nicetius operated. He would stay in Trier, guiding them in any way he could until he eventually passed away in 566. And then he was buried at the Church of Saint Maximin in Trier. His feast day is October 1st, and you could probably guess this, but he is the patron saint of Trier, Germany. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I'll do my best to answer them. So, what are your thoughts of Saint Nicetius? Would you have stood up to the kings like he did? I hope you found his story interesting, and I look forward to reading about your thoughts on Saint Nicetius. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to support the channel, you can subscribe, download the episode, like, comment, share it with your friends, or even shoot me a suggestion on a saint to check out by emailing me at sanctifiedpodcast@proton.me. You can find the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Podbean, and more. Just search for the Sanctified Podcast, and you should find a few episodes. Take care, and have a wonderful day.